you're not allowed to teach what they call creationism. In a way, they sort of win the argument before they start, because they call intelligent design Jesus' presence on the planet, his death, his preachings, his death, his resurrection, and they go all the way past that to creationism. And to me, they win the argument because they set it up so that they're basically shooting fish in a barrel, and they're not really, encountering it early on. And because I think for me, I spent my first, if there was like a 24-month period of time during which I went from ground zero to joining a church, the first year and a half or so was studying basically the human body, the planet Earth, the galaxies and beyond, but more than anything, the human body and how complicated that is, and how intricate it is, and how there's no geological record of, human beings and almost all of the other major phylums appeared in a 2-minute period of a 24-hour day, if you count a 24-hour day since 13.5 billion years ago till now. All the major phylums emerged in a 2-minute period, and it actually was probably a lot faster than that, because when they've looked at the strata and so forth of that period of time, of the fossil record, the length of time it took for all these forms to appear is below the resolution of the geological record. So they can't even hone down on how short of a period it was. It could have been overnight. All they know is it was in 2 or 3 million years or less that everything showed up at once. So a couple of things I want to sort of prefatory is that the idea is about that faith is a religious concept, and that it means a belief in something where there's despite strong contradictory evidence. And well, number one, it's not just a religious concept. You can have faith in all kinds of things: faith in your parents, faith in your school, faith in your church, whatever. And also, so there's this exchange that I've heard it so many times, because I've watched the video so many times, and it's the two speakers in the exchange are John Lennox, who's a Christian from Northern Ireland, is a teacher, professor of mathematics at Oxford University, and he was debating Peter Springer, I think. He's a Australian atheist. And Mr. Springer said that one of his major objections to Christianity was that people tend to stay in, they become Christians because they were born to Christian parents, and that just propagates itself through generations. And so when John had a chance to speak, John Lennox, he said, Peter, I've told them about my parents, who were both Christians, and my grandparents were all Christians. What about yours? Were they atheists? And he said, yes, they were. He said, well, I see that you stayed in the faith in which you were brought up. And the guy says, well, it's not a faith. And John says, well, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you actually believed it. So there you go. So there's when I say God, and the next however long it takes, I don't know how long it's going to take actually. I sort of, for the purposes of this talk, God is equal to intelligent design, because the only aspects of God that I'm drawing upon are his role as intelligent designer. And also the other side of the fence of science, that sort of school of thought goes by a whole bunch of names: chance and the laws of nature, physics and chemistry, random mutation, let me see, it's called selection on random mutation, and they're all in naturalism, reductionist. There's a whole bunch of things, and essentially what they all mean together, what they share in meaning, is that it's analyzing what the Earth and its inhabitants bottom up. The atoms bumping against each other, and this happens and that happens, and then something else happens, and a chimp, leopard becomes a chimp, and a chimp becomes a human being, and that sort of thing. It's just a little emerging. Whereas intelligent design is more the other way. It's top down. It's just like the way everybody does things. Like, you don't make a car by getting 4 tires and then figuring out what else you need to add to make it into a car. You make the plan, and then you go get the things you need to put the plan together. And that's pretty much true of anything. A factory, software, pressure cooker, you name it. And anyway, that's just terminology. So in the world, as I said, the two seemingly opposite views are scientism and religion, or creative design. However, that's kind of a false dichotomy, because to show that, I mean, it's true, is that many of the world's greatest scientists were Christians. Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Francis Bacon, Pascal, George Washington Carver, and Albert Einstein, and also a little bit more impressively, in the entirety of the 20th century, 2/3 of the Nobel Prize winners were Christians, including 73% of the people who won in chemistry, 65% in physics, and 62% in medicine. Isaac Newton said, "What we know is a drop. What we do not know is a vast ocean. The admirable arrangement and harmony of the universe could only have come from the plan of an omniscient and omnipotent being." Francis Baker, the director of the Human Genome Project, the world's largest collaborative biological project, said, "I see DNA as the information of all living things, as God's language, and the elegance and complexity of our own bodies and the rest of nature is as a reflection of God's plan." Albert Einstein said, "Everyone who is seriously committed to the cultivation of science becomes convinced that in all the laws of the universe is manifest a spirit vastly superior to man, and to which we, with our powers, must feel humble." And the last scientist, who I won't name until after I say his quote, I've never denied the existence of God. I think the greatest argument for the existence of God is the impossibility that the immense universe, sublime above all measure, and man were the result of chance." That was Charles Darwin. So the scientists are split. So the choice cannot be so simple as science against intelligent design. Several points about this. Rationality is bigger than science. Peter Medawar, a British biologist, noted that science cannot answer the basic questions of a child. Where did I come from? Why am I here, and where am I going? In contrast, the philosopher Bertrand Russell said, "What science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know." Is that a statement of science? No. Then we cannot know it. It is a logically incoherent statement. Science does not teach us everything we know. Einstein saw this, and he said, "You can speak of the ethical foundations of science, but you cannot speak of the scientific foundations of ethics." If science was the only path, all humanities courses of study would serve no purpose and could therefore just be dropped from all colleges. The second thing about the basic science versus intelligent design is that it has to do with the nature of explanation. There's agency and there's mechanism. If you had a car in here and you said, "Well, what explains the existence of the car?" You could say the laws of internal combustion and clever engineering. Or you could say Henry Ford. And you actually need both. So they don't conflict with each other. They're not opposites. And the same is true of a pot of water boiling on the stove. You could say that the burner is heating the metal of the pot and it's making the water molecules jump around inside and they get warmer. Or you could say, "I want a cup of tea." And actually, the "I want a cup of tea" predates the science. People have been drinking tea for a couple of millenniums. So a way to sort of say that in a general form is the existence of a mechanism which does something is not in itself an argument for the non-existence of the existence of an agent who designed it. And another factor that plays into these confusions is that some people, the idea is about that as science moves forward, if there's something we can't figure out, we have to attribute that to God. Well, as science goes further and further, there's less room for God because we've figured more stuff out, and so he's sort of backed God into a corner. The contrary view is that scientific discoveries enhance one's admiration of whoever designed it that way. And that is actually the way it works. If you think about, I once saw a preliminary drawing of Leonardo da Vinci, of a painting of his, and it looked like a mechanical drawing. It was 10,000 lines with perspective in all different directions. So he did not just sit down and slap a brush to paint and come up with it, and he was good. There was a tremendous amount that went on before he got his paint out at all. And the same is true what do you think of people who are in symphony orchestras? Do you think they appreciate music less than the average person or more? So the truth is, the natural way is that as you learn more and more about something, if there's really something to it, you appreciate it more, not less. So the whole thing is God of the gaps is kind of backwards. So the idea of scientific discoveries replacing God bit by bit is not logical. And lastly, when we kind of get to the punchline, this whole first part of this is having to do with just sort of thinking about thought, thinking about knowledge, thinking about abstractly how things happen, and that's leaving aside all of the detail of the complexity of human bodies, how many cells are there, how many atoms in each cell, what goes on in the cells, and so on. Science is done with the human mind. We are told that the human mind is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. What are the implications of this for the question of intelligent design? Here's what Darwin himself had to say. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Many people maintain that the driving force of the natural processes which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties were not primarily concerned with truth, but with survival. And we all know what generally happens to truth when individuals, a commercial enterprise, or a nation feel themselves threatened in their struggle for survival. With the mind developed through an evolutionary process, thought must be regarded as some sort of neurophysiological phenomenon. From the evolutionary perspective, the neurophysiology may well be adaptive. But why for one moment would one think that beliefs caused by the neurophysiology should be mostly true? The chemist Halding said, if the thoughts in my mind are just the motions of atoms in my brain, a mechanism that has arisen by mindless, unguided processes, why should I believe anything it tells me, including the fact that it's made of atoms? Alvin Plantinga, one of America's leading philosophers who lives in New York, puts it this way. If Dawkins, that's Richard Dawkins, the sort of the world's foremost atheist right now, is right, and we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he has given a strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore, inevitably, to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own science and his atheism. His biology and his belief in naturalism would therefore seem to be at war with each other in a conflict which has nothing to do with God. So it's not irrational to believe in supernature, things above nature, or in intelligent design. It is irrational to believe solely in nature. The shoe is entirely on the other foot. Atheistic reductionism, this is a long, complicated sentence, but it's just super muscle-bound, and I will repeat it. Atheistic reductionism undermines the foundations of the rationality needed to construct the its arguments, or any arguments of any kind whatsoever. On the other hand, intelligent design, which includes biblical theism, is completely coherent in its explanation why the universe is rationally intelligible, because it teaches us that the universe out there and the mind in here are ultimately traceable to the same intelligent designer. Naturalism is incapable of explaining itself. Therefore, rational explanation has a legitimate claim to universality, but natural explanation does not. Naturalism is doomed. It teaches that the universe is a causally closed system by definition. This means that everything can be explained in terms of physical and chemical processes. But the naturalists cannot explain their own scientific theories or equations in terms of mere physical or chemical processes for the simple reason that theories, laws, and equations are not physical. They are immaterial. You and I live in the information age. We are told by physicists that information is a fundamental quantity which is not reducible to physics and chemistry. So the irony of naturalism is that we are now in an age where we must believe in something which is non-material. It is supernatural in the strict meaning of the term. The very existence of rationality can be seen as an outpost of the intelligent designer, or God, which provides the conceptual space for understanding that limiting ourselves to naturalistic explanations destroys the possibility of all explanation. The immateriality of information is important. It means we cannot reduce information or its communication to physics and chemistry. We humans are not only processors of text, we are creators of text. So we see the beginning of the supernatural in ourselves. And in the so that's kind of the I said I'd repeat that one paragraph, and I will, because it's a monster. Atheistic reductionism, physics and chemistry, chance and the laws of nature, evolution, undermines the foundation of the rationality needed to construct its arguments, or any arguments of any kind whatsoever. So now more on the empirical side. I recently saw an article in a paper that said that 99.9% of our DNA is the same from one person to the next. And I don't know what the point of that was, but I imagine it was to, I don't know, say it's that DNA gets ballyhooed too much and it's all the same for everybody anyway, and what's the big deal or something. Well, it's a misunderstanding of how big DNA is. The DNA string in each of our cells has 3.5 billion characters in precise order in a four-letter chemical alphabet. So if only 0.1% of those spots are available to differentiate between each of us, well, that works out to something like the number of possible human beings that could be created, all different, is 10 to the 2.2 millionth power, which is way beyond anybody's imagination. And so that means that each of the 107 billion, by comparison, a really tiny number of people who have ever been born, that's the number, by the way, 107 billion, was drawn from a massive number. So you are like, you're not just one in a million, you're one in a trillion, and I could keep saying the word for the next half hour and I wouldn't get to the number yet. So we're all extremely carefully selected. So if you think, is it possible that there's a reason why I'm here? You bet. You were very carefully selected. DNA is the most densely packed information known to man. In a gram of DNA, which would fit on the tip of your finger, you can put as much information as in 233 3-terabyte hard drives weighing 332 pounds. I actually think that's probably an understatement, because in the human body there's about 100 trillion cells, and each cell, I kind of knew that first number for a while, but only last year did I learn how many atoms are in a cell. 100 trillion. And there's a trillion cells, 10 trillion cells, 10 to 100 trillion cells in your body, so there's not much room in there. And inside each of those cells, which has each cell's got 100 trillion atoms to work with, there's all kinds of complex machinery. The main things in the human body that function, that do things, that like heal a wound or whatever. There's about 30,000. There are proteins, about 30, and proteins are arrangements of amino acids. The shortest is about 150. The longest is like hemoglobin, or it's near the longest, like 600 or 700 amino acids, and the average is about 300. And they're built in the cell. They're built in the cell when needed. Like if you cut yourself, some instruction somehow will be issued, and that protein will be manufactured. Where does it get the information? From DNA, from the part of DNA that they used to think was useless, that didn't do anything. But that's the library, and somehow it's things in the cell know to go look up go to the library, get the stuff, get the information, bring it back to somebody that can sort of read the information, then take those instructions to a factory elsewhere in the cell where the protein is assembled. And that's, by the way, you got to go through a porthole, and there's a guard there at the porthole saying, like, you want to go in there? Yeah. Not everybody goes in, so they let the information go in to make the protein. It's called a ribosome, that factory. So the idea that you could start with one protein and change one of the amino acids, like in evolution, and stumble across another functional protein is absurdly wrong. It's so complicated making the proteins that they're not made ahead of time in the human body. They're made as needed. And where does the information to make it come from? That is the huge question. So that the origin of life boils down to the origin of information. And in view of that, I find it really powerful that the first words in John are, "In the beginning was the Word," the information. So science has finally arrived back at John 1:1. I've got a 3-minute video that just describes kind of what goes on in a cell when something needs to take place. And it's an animation, so it's going to be way cruder. And also, it fills the screen. And remember, a cell is one of 100 trillion in your body, so it's not very big. Somehow inside that cell.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a 2-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing. And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So we've talked about the difficulty of starting with one protein and getting to another, just astronomically impossible. It's, in fact, the odds, there's a guy named Douglas actually spent 13 years, very smart guy, 13 years studying the likelihood of all the different combinations of amino acids strung together in 300. Of all those different possibilities, what percentage of them are actually functional, and which of the others are all just junk? And it's extremely tiny. So he actually calculated out the odds of changing one amino acid in a functional protein and getting another functional protein was equal to the odds of finding a single marked atom in our galaxy with a limited amount of time to look for it. So so that, and I would just say if Darwin were alive today, he wouldn't be a Darwinist. He was a pretty modest guy, actually, and he was also a believer in God. In fact, he said, "I never doubted the existence of God," as a quote. And so that kind of feels like a punchline to me. But there's one other thing that I wanted to mention: is everybody here heard of the Cambrian Explosion? See your hands. Anybody hasn't heard of it? That's cool. Okay, well, I was in the same boat until like a year ago, and I stumbled across the right video on YouTube and started learning about it. And it turns out that the fossil record worldwide, take it all, put it in a hat. It shows that at about I don't know how long ago, I think it's in the millions of years, not the billions, but every major animal design showed up in an extremely short and unmeasurably short period of time. Completely done. No changes, nothing needed to be done to turn it into what it was actually going to become. It just showed up, boom, just everything in place, the whole body plan, all the vertebrae, the skeletal, everything was there all at once. And Darwin knew about it. The first discovery of a layer of rock in which all these organisms appeared, and nothing below in the rock, so nothing was there, and boom, everything appeared, including sea creatures 10,000 feet up in the Rockies. He knew about it and knew it was a killer for his theory, but he thought that eventually, through more research and more study and more digging, perhaps in the ocean floor or elsewhere, that they would find the buildup, the ancestral buildup precursors of us or other animals we know today. And 100 years later, we have it. And there's been a lot of work to try to find it, and you might think, well, of course, a lot of work. Well, the work has been driven because of the world of grants. You can get a grant to hunt for evidence to support Darwin. You can't get a grant for intelligent design. In fact, you may lose your job. You may lose your professorship if you start talking about it too much. So there's been a tremendous amount of money and time and intelligence focused on trying to find a fossil record which would show incremental changes leading up to us and other species we know today. And it hasn't been found, and most people think it's not going to be found. It all started with the Creator. And one last thing. I know this is a little bit scattered, but this is the first time I've done this. So there's things that caught my eye, and I've tried to sort of put it into a nice flow, but there are a few things that just wouldn't fit in the flow. And this is one of them. Is that it's easy to, since we know the law of gravity and we know how fast light travels and we know all about different forms of energy, it's easy to think that we know what they are, but we don't. We don't know what gravity is. Why do two big things pull towards each other? No one knows the answer to that. They know the laws that govern the pull, and they know the law so well they can put a man on the moon, but nobody knows what it is. So this came up with a guy who came up to him. My favorite John Lennox, the guy came up to his speech after his talk he gave and said, "John, I appreciate all that's all very interesting and stuff, but we're scientists. I mean, really, God? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Could I ask?" He said, "I'll tell you, but can I ask you a question or two before?" And he said, "Sure, go ahead." So he said, "What is energy?" And I said, "I'm not sure." "What is gravity?" "Well, we have these laws and da-da-da-da." "That's not what I asked you. What is it?" "I don't know." And so John said, should I write you off as a scientist?" I said, "Please don't." He said, "Well, you were about to write me off because I couldn't explain God, who is infinitely more complex than light or gravity or consciousness or anything else you want to list." And somehow that made a lot of sense to me, that it's presumptuous to think that you could put it all out in something plain and simple, and when you can't even do that for something as well known as gravity. So, thank you very much. As you can tell, probably it's a little bit of an emotional experience for me, but I appreciate your putting up with it.
Wow. Kids, if you have any questions on that, you can ask your parents when you get home. I'm sure they will help you. But I really appreciated that. That was awesome. Tom had come up to me and said, I've got all this stuff going around. I could think of about 5 or 6 talks I'd like to give. And I said, well, let's start with one. And the one was a winner. So we'll look at number 2 sometime. You don't have to cook to get that right. I was going to say anyone might come up and say, how come I don't get to give a talk? And I was going to say, well, if you can cook us a meal, you're in. But the Bible starts like this. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. No one's ever come up with a better explanation than that. That's the one I believe, and I think many of you do too. But if you're not sure, then check it out. Think about the things Tom has been sharing. If that's where your faith has been and the scientific answers to life, check it out. You don't have to bury your head in the sand to become a believer in God. In fact, it's really just the opposite. So again, thank you, Tom. I'm going to lead us in a closing prayer, and we're going to be dismissed. And thank you all for coming. And we'll see you, those in our church, next Sunday. And for the rest of you, may God bless you, and thank you for coming too. Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks. You are an awesome God. You have created all things, and Lord, you continue to sustain this world. We don't know what gravity is scientifically, but we know it comes from your hand. The scripture says all things hold together by your hand. You are gravity in that sense, Lord, and we give you thanks tonight. And we thank you for Tom. Thank you for his desire to share this wonderful meal with us, and not just a meal in our stomachs, but a meal in our minds, a meal in our souls. And pray that we will take the things we learned tonight and build on them in our own lives and grow closer to you as a result. Be with each person as they go now, for we ask this in Christ's name. And all God's people said, Amen. Thanks, you're dismissed.